very happy today to have Ximena Benavides speak to us about the digital clinical trials and private equity firms, the tensions between efficiency and drug evidence access. We'll say something more about Ximena Benavides is a postdoctoral associate and lecturer at Yale University Department of Political Science in the Ethics, Politics, and Economics program. He's also a resident fellow at the Information Society Project, Yale Law School, and affiliated faculty at the Yale Institute of Global Health. Her research focuses on the intersections of law, public policy, and political economy, of life sciences, innovation, particularly in the areas of information and industrial policies for access to quality medicine, both domestically and in a global context, particularly from a health justice perspective. Currently, she's working on the CIHR PHAC Infectious Disease Innovation Governance Project at the Health Institute of Dalhousie, the School of Law, conducting qualitative empirical research on WHO's mRNA technology transfer program. In 2021, at the Yale Institute for Global Health Fellow, she worked for Gavi COVAX facility during the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Benavides was born in Peru, where she received her law degree magna cum laude and was an adjunct law professor. She held a Master's of Laws and a Doctor of the Science of Law, J.S.D. from Yale Law School. Before coming to Yale, she practiced law for over 15 years, advising governments, multilateral and international organizations, private actors in cross-border corporate transactions, and international arbitration in law firms and the financial industry in New York and countries in Latin America. And this is reflected in the paper that she'll be presenting. So without further ado, the floor is to you.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Lemons, for the presentation and foremost for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here in person. Thank you, all of you, for making the time in your busy schedules to be here and to engage with this ongoing research project. So I changed a little bit the title of the presentation just because I want to include it as a research project. So it's the financialization of digital clinical trials, what is driving my attention. And I want to focus specifically on the tensions about producing scientific evidence through these kind of new financial vehicles. Roadmap for the talk, we will talk about 4 specific points. First, what is a digital clinical trial? Then how we contextualize this within financialization of biomedical innovation. What are the problems that I am trying to identify here? Basically, focused on scientific knowledge accessibility. And finally, which are my next research questions. And so, because this is a research project, I will love your feedback, your comments, reactions to see what exactly it's a good approach to the next pieces coming from this project. So first of all, what exactly is a digital clinical trial? And why are private equity firms so interested in digital clinical trials? Digital clinical trials are also called decentralized clinical trials. So there is a purpose behind them, and it's basically to efficiently reach a more diverse and representative trial population. Why? Because in the US, enrollment and representation and trial population is low. And those kind of situations generate a challenge to address health disparities in populations. So the goal here is to reach a farther population, create more data, more representative and diverse data, so we can achieve or get more scientific evidence to back up safe and effective treatments for more diseases. For that goal, we have the formula of decentralization. Basically, that means to have remote trials, right? Virtual trials. And that will help a lot mobility challenges, mobility constraints. This has exploded during COVID-19 pandemic, right? But this has been used before. And basically, the thing is that we are going to be able to reach a larger population of people living in the US. Just to picture it, at least 70% of the US population lives 2 hours or more away from a research institution. So transition into remote trials, it's supposed to bring a lot of efficient results. And the other portion of clinical trials is digitization, not digitalization. And this is basically the use of technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, algorithms, and other ways to collect data, aggregate it, analyze it, and have better results that will lead better diseases or better innovation. At least that's the goal. But again, as I was telling you, this has been used in the past. At least we can talk about 2003 in the US, having already remote trials for different kind of diseases. Probably the one of the most popular ones was Pfizer's remote control LA in 2011, which was supposed to be a milestone, right, in digital trials and biomedical innovation. We have a huge explosion of these trials during the COVID-19 pandemic. Basically, with all this explosion, L.L.M's research led a big initiative around COVID-19 vaccine remote trials, right? Basically, L.L.M's won a big contract with big pharma, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and other large pharmaceutical companies producing COVID-19 vaccines. They bought large clinical trial sites in Louisiana, in Houston, and we will follow later about the story of L.L.M's research, but it was not a successful story. And in 2021, because they were just a trial, they became permanent, right? They seem to be pretty efficient, and they're constituting now a major part of the industry's portfolios. Private equity firms, yeah. Sorry.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah,
Are we allowed
please.
to ask questions throughout, or you prefer that we wait to the very end?
I don't know, what do you prefer? Do you prefer questions at the end of the talk, or?
I have a clarifying question at this time. Is that,
I'm
if that's
either way
okay?
fine.
Okay.
Sorry?
Can you just,
Yeah.
Ximena, can you just briefly explain the key differences between a conventional clinical trial and a remote digital one? Like, is it, obviously there's a healthcare practitioner having to be around to
Yeah.
administer a treatment, like either a dummy, a placebo, or a real, and that still has to happen.
Right. Well, it's, okay, so first of all, these digital clinical trials are not applied to all kind of diseases. So basically, for general population diseases, they are applied. So that means the population will not need to be hospitalized, for instance. There is supposed to be a fine monitoring and oversight of these patients, virtual and remotely happening. And basically, they receive everything by mail, and they are monitored by electric devices and how this is progressing. This is basically how it works. That also gives opportunity to monitor patients in a longer time, which was not the
The
case.
patient doesn't necessarily have to see somebody that a trial.
Not
doctor, they can
necessarily.
sort of do it all from a Amazon delivery. They could just.
Yes, I mean, there's some trials that have been 100% entirely remote. Yes, that's possible.
Oh.
Yes, yes. So private equity firms, why they have been obsessed with the US healthcare system? Today, 2.3 private equity healthcare transactions happen daily in the US. So private equity really cares about what's going on in the healthcare sector, care to say the least. At the beginning, 2000s, they were very attracted by hospitals and nursing homes. There are a lot of research and empirical studies trying to document which are the poor health outcomes of these kind of prospects on nursing homes. Actually, the Biden administration is very concerned with these kind of outcomes, and it's trying to apply some policy changes here. In 2010, they were more obsessed with medical practices, outpatient care, and also trauma and emergency care. And in 2015, they were more looking into other kind of profitable, non-hospital-based medical practices, saying dental, dermatologists, orthopedics, and so on. Even at the end, they have been very interested in medical debt collection. So now they are shifting toward clinical trials. We can say that during the last 2 decades, private equity healthcare investments have increased at least 20 X times their value. So this is really prominent, right? And The other lesson that we can take from here is that during those last 2 decades, regulation has been poor or ineffective or insufficient, right? To address the concerns that we are seeing in this space. So private equity firms are paying attention. They have taken notice that the healthcare sector is prominent, so they can grow a lot there. And they are interested in drug development now. What is driving private equity appetite for clinical trials? At least 65% of the total clinical research transactions reported have involved private equity firms. That's a significant number for the US clinical research market. In the past 2 years, at least 10 private equity-backed trial platforms have been acquired, mostly late stage of the trial. So that's phase 2 and phase 3. Yes.
Are these mostly small venture, like small laboratories venturing out to do a trial? See, this is not Pfizer.
It's not Pfizer, but it is Pfizer, and I will explain that later. So these are small biotechnologies. Most of them are private equity firms. Some of them are a mixture between venture capital and private equity firms, but there are some similarities. Pfizer is interested in acquiring them later, so big pharmaceuticals are acquiring them later. Once they have a drug approved by the FDA, that makes sense in terms of risk aversion. And you will see also that people that were managing large pharmaceutical firms are also managing these small biotechnology companies. So yeah, that's exactly one of the guiding questions for the next portion of the research. So the question is why these companies are so obsessed with private clinical trials. And here I want to show 2 specific cases. We have Royalty Pharma investment in last stage clinical trials. They have been acquiring not only US-based trial facilities, but abroad, and they're bringing them back to the US. And another one that is pretty interesting to look at, it's Blackstone, right? Blackstone is one of the largest fund managers in the world, and they are acquiring aggressively lots of trial sites. But to answer the question of why private equity is so obsessed with clinical trials, I think we have to go back a little bit in history and to see what happened with biomedical innovation and when it turned to be fundamental. So to understand the context of financialization of clinical trials, we have probably to go back to the post-war area of biomedical innovation in the US. So by that time, mostly the research was done by private entities or occasionally by some public or government sites. And then it changed, right? It exploded at some point, biomedical innovation, and they realized that there was a huge need to incentivize investment in innovation. So the US launched a Vital Act, and basically what they were saying is that government-funded research by private entities, including universities, research institutions, will be granted IP, and intellectual property protection, right? And so these were great financial news for private enterprises, right? Because they were having this incentive, right? Intellectual property will spur innovation. But even they have another kind of financial incentive is that they will receive money from the government to get these trials financed, and still they will own the intellectual property right. So these were great news. And then we have a lot of academic research institutions opening tech transfer offices. And researchers working there, they also saw another kind of big business opportunity, right? They saw the possibility of partnering with ventures that will provide them capital. So their research, instead of staying in academic institutions, could leave the laboratory bench and go into the market. And the capital that ventures were offering was with low cost. If you add a portion of government funding, it was a great deal. right? You lower financial risks, you get even more capital coming from private entities, ventures capital, and basically your research can be out in the market, could be a tangible research. So that's what happened, and ventures were attracted a lot by biotech by the end of the 80s and 90s. This was also the time when ventures capital entities were super popular around pension funds. They were very interested in profitable sectors, and because they were looking for more growth for their shareholders, right? They were investors. So this was an alignment of interest, I would say, that was playing probably against biomedical innovation, but that's what exactly what's happening. So if we put it in other terms, what we were having is by the 70s, we were having the assetization of IP, right? So all companies wanted to have these IP protections, so that IP rights were going to be treated as assets. Those kind of tools, legal tools, were given the companies the opportunity to recoup all the research and development investments, right? Even though they were even receiving funds from the government. Then we have this shift to corporatization, basically because they are working together with venture capitals. And then at the end, we have this financialization because venture capitals brought more people from the financial sector interested in this area, in biomedical innovation. So having an intellectual property as an sport for innovation, it shifted to be kind of intellectual property monetized, right? So it's more an asset of financial entities rather than just regular corporations. So this is what we call the shareholder maximization value, right? What venture capital did was to change the corporate governance strategy of these corporations. They were not looking anymore for great revenues, but they were looking for more profits. And that distinction is key. They were looking for growth. So in a way, they will be able to distribute those profits to their shareholders, right? So maximization of profits is the mantra here. And as long as they can get into businesses, short business with high returns, this is going to be a great opportunity for them. And biotechnology was the perfect place to do that. We have a lot of other academics. I'm quoting here, fixing the game book from your former dean of the business school here. Lots of academics were saying that this kind of value, this kind of approach to markets was wrong, right? And that we need a more moral capitalist approach to how markets function. But this was, I mean, we can tell from here that there's a lot of criticism of the type of principle that is guiding the market, but we have no policy changes here. Today, financialization is a hot topic in biotechnology innovation. Just in the past 2 weeks, we had 2 big articles talking about this. One is the financialization of health in the United States, and basically what they are saying is that private financial industries are very into this area, right? And they talk about multiple areas, not only biotechnology, but at the end, I think the final claim, an important claim here, is that they are saying that financialization is now a structural determinant of health. They're calling financial fallout the idea of having financial institutions aggressively investing in healthcare. So again, at the end, it's not anymore a matter of having more drugs with IP protections. It's more about having those generating more profits. So the goal here is to provide more returns to shareholders.
But can I just interject, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
But what's changed? I mean, it used to be Pfizer, now it's a bunch of private equity guys owning the IP. They're still going to price to maximize profits. They're still going to, game the regulation to the extent they can.
I think it's the corporate structure of these companies is not only about shareholders. We have institutional investors here as owners of these companies.
Okay.
So that is driving this financial interest, right? We have investment banks, we have other kind of financial institutions playing around.
Okay.
A confirmation of these companies. So if we look into again, all these are public companies, right? That was a portion that venture capital brought to the table. All these were traded in the market, their shares. So it was, you have multiple shareholders to attend, right? You want to advocate for any, but you will advocate only for revenues at the end. Because you want to sell your product, right? Your venture as the most profitable in the market. So that allows a lot of room for, institutional shareholders and more diffuse interests. So now private equity gets into the game, right? And private equity firms are a different animal from venture capital. Venture capital are public companies, private equity, not. So that specific difference changed a little bit the game here, because there is going to be less regulation applicable to private equity firms. So that means that they're going to be under the radar of regulators in the market as well. In the US, at least, antitrust regulations are insufficient, not to say inexistent, to control what's going on with private equity. And because they are not traded, it's very hard to know who are behind. So transparency is also very low. But again, private equity and venture capital are trying to partner together to get into this deal clinical trial world. What exactly are the drivers for private equity firms to get into this field? Well, the clinical trial and specifically digital clinical trials are valued in $16 billion right now, and their growth is very steady, 6-point compound annual growth, at least through the 2025 assessment. There are other drivers for investment. Basically, the business model is pretty attractive. Mostly the activities that are performed in these trials sites are outsourced, and they're outsourced to clinical research organizations. These CROs, they can take the form of small companies, small biotechnology companies, right? The great deal about outsourcing is that you reduce the operational costs, you reduce the financial risks. If the drug is not approved or if your clinical trial is not successful, you don't care. The clinical CROs will get paid anyway for their job of running the trial, right? And at the same time, the drug companies, they are outsourcing the portion of their business. So no one is losing here. Interesting, at the end of the day, big pharmaceutical companies are buying successful trial sites once they have a good perspective for approval of these drugs. Private equity firms are investing firstly in CROs, and that means that they can control CROs, they can manage CROs, they can have a lot of leverage on their business decisions, they can put directors, they can put managers, they can really control the operation of these CROs. Another important feature of this business model is that digital clinical trials require a different type and needs of infrastructure. So as that will represent a lot of different opportunities for more CROs, right? So there is exponential business opportunities here. And digital clinical trials are mostly used in the most profitable phases of clinical trials, phase 2 and 3, and mostly for general population drugs. That means higher profitability. Although I have to recognize that there are some outlets saying that the industry is also interested in rare diseases trials. So in private equity firms, based on these kind of business model, it makes a lot of sense to invest in digital clinical trials, right? From a financial point of view. Still, there are examples of very unsuccessful investments, right? And size 37 is one of those, right? Their share price dropped tremendously after a very successful $40 million public offering, and later another public offering with NASDAQ. So what is trying to, the lesson we take from this example is that it's risky. It's not a very simple business, right? But still, private equity firms have enough incentives to take that risk. And at the end of the day, the business model makes sense. So probably the lesson here is that you have to be very organized and well planned and have a business model that is very timely with clinical trials. Other incentives, as we were talking about before, regulation, right? Because it's a private equity firm, by their nature, they have insufficient regulatory oversight. I'm here talking about, corporate tax, antitrust. I mean, many kind of regulatory agencies are not looking after PE firms. And there's a huge fragmentation, right? So as much fragmentation we find here, there are more opportunities for CROs and the private equity firms that are operating them to expand in the market, right? And also fragmentation allow them to put all the pieces together later. So while they're fragmented, they are reducing the financial risks, and then they can merge when they have more economic value. The big question here is whether or not biomedical innovation is getting a good deal from having private equity firms involved. And this question can be solved, I think, with from very different angles. Mostly academics have been addressing this question from a privacy concern and how to protect participants of trial, right? Through informed consent and data aggregation and data collection. But I'm trying to respond to this question with a different angle. And this angle is from scientific generation. Trials are generating evidence. And that's exactly the evidence that we need to have more safe and effective drugs, not just more drugs in the market. So the question here is it helpful to have private equity firms doing this business? And I will just, before saying what I think, I would like to know what you think. Do you think it's a good deal to have private equity firms here, behind the scenes, producing all the data that we need to back up drugs, how effective drugs could be?
Well, if it reduces the costs of clinical trials, then there might be an effect of like more companies coming out with more drugs that might be more effective, like it might increase the incentive to develop more effective drugs.
Yeah, and I hear you. I mean, a lot of I've been even talking to some Canadian academics that were involved in clinical trials, and they say exactly the same. These kind of digital clinical trials, they were not very concerned about the portion of private equity firms governing digital clinical trials, but at large, they were saying that these kind of new business is creating a lot of efficiency results. So yeah, the costs are going to be reduced so we can get more drugs. What else? Anyone think it's a good idea to have private equity firms? Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't the private equity firms doing the research still be governed by the same rules of, registering the clinical trials if you want to get it published in a good journal, the result published in a good journal?
Supposedly, yes. In theory, yes. In theory, yes.
Right. So, I mean, I guess I'm not familiar with all the problems that can occur. I mean, obviously you need data. You need people to do it competently. You need people to monitor patients. You need all the data to be entered into the spreadsheet correctly. You need to have it not tampered with. It has to be the actual data, not fraudulent data.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm just not sure how big a deal with these guys would be. Like, are these guys honest brokers?
Yeah, that's one of the questions. So the rules that we have right now, monitoring the scientific production of knowledge, are not going to change. So we only have the producer of the knowledge changing, right? Private equity firms. So what exactly are the problems that we have right now in the US with scientific generation? Scientific evidence generation has a huge access problem right now with the FDA regulation that we have in place. So the expectation with digital clinical trials is to create more data and to make it more diverse, right? More representative of the population as they reach a more diverse participant group. But the problems are going to be the same. The problems are data publicity, data opacity, data validation. That means that right now, imagine that we don't have private equity firms. Right now, companies that produce scientific evidence, which are private companies, they are not delivering to the FDA all and complete scientific evidence. So negative data is not provided to the FDA. All data is not provided not only to the FDA, but to independent researchers who are trying to validate whatever the FDA has had. Just think about, and probably in Canada, you're more aware about that, the opioid crisis, right? What was the evidence that we're having a good backup to support the evidence that opioids were good to treat all kinds of pain? I mean, it's exactly the same. We're trying to produce here the best possible evidence. It's a reality that we will never reach that point of excellence and 100% infallibility of the evidence that we get, but we need, the FDA in this case needs to have the most possible evidence there to at least be sure that once they approved a therapy in the market, this is going to be safe and effective to the larger population, right? So if all this information is not revealed to the FDA, or the information that is revealed to the FDA, it's not accessible to independent researchers, we are missing the main goal here. And so the question here is now, if with the same rules, if we change the actor who is behind digital clinical trials, what will happen? The other way to frame it is, do private equity firms or do private equity backed digital clinical trials will make any difference? Will they address better the problem that we have, the accessibility problem that we have? And personally, I think there is not going to be any change, right? And for that, I'm trying to respond this from the nature of private equity firms. They're eminently private. So the incentives for more transparency are going to be lower. The incentives for regulating these kind of entities are going to be lower. Despite these problems, there is a lot of activity of trial sites in private equity firms and digital clinical trials. This is an example of Headlands research that at the beginning of this talk I mentioned in the context of the COVID-19 vaccines testing. They were creating a lot of sites. At the end of the day, they closed those sites, and all the information that they gathered coming from patients and the production of scientific knowledge, we don't know where that is. I mean, that's exactly one example. We don't have ways to properly enforce or to patrol or to police these kind of private equity firms. There are no way out. And again, the other layer of under regulation is technology, right? Remember that the tries to bring another aspect of use of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and technology at large. And again, that comes with a lot of caveats of under regulation. So what can be done? So this specific paper they shared was structured and the idea of health law as a private law matter. So the questions were more about what can private law do? I honestly think that private law, I mean, just to answer this big question, it's very, there's not much that private law can do. And so probably more the answer goes to public law and more regulation, right? And here in transparency, I'm thinking on private equity or transparency applying to private equity firms, but more transparency standards applying to the production of scientific knowledge. Moving forward, I'm trying to tackle different research questions. One of the big challenges that this project has is that private equity firms, although they're very invested in this field, we don't have still any drug approved by the FDA that have followed private equity-backed clinical trial. So I don't have any data to compare what it looked like with a private equity firm in contrast with non-private equity firms. So that's one challenge of this. So one way to do it is probably just to focus on singular cases, right? And do a very granular study. For instance, Headlands research centers, what exactly happened when they were doing these clinical trials remotely for COVID-19 vaccines. The other way is to wait until we have more drugs approved by the FDA that have followed a private equity run clinical trial and make a comparative study. What I'm trying to answer with those kind of methodologies is that there is a kind of business model very prominent here. And those goes back to your first question, is that behind the CROs that are led by private equity firms are large pharmaceutical companies. So at the end of the day, what is happening is that they are controlling these kind of businesses, right? It has been said that the best place to hide something is out in the open. And I think this is pretty much happening here. Again, this is an hypothesis, and I will need more data to see what's going on. But the conclusion here will say that former pharma leaders are behind the structure and the management of present CROs and private equity firms. The other way to read this is that there is a lot of relay race strategies, right? So basically here, I'm not focused on a ton, but more on, or the other way. I'm not focused here on the runner, but on the baton, right? And it's the intellectual property protections that are given to these CROs. So CROs are running these clinical trials. They are getting the intellectual property rights protection. And so what are they doing when in later stage of the clinical trial, the mergers and acquisitions occur? Who is having at the end the most value of these intellectual property protections? I don't know, these are, for me, those are interesting research questions here, but I will be more than happy to see what exactly triggers your attention when we think about private equity firms leading field clinical trials. What are your fears? Or probably I am very, I shouldn't fear at all, and this is gonna be all good for healthcare outcomes. Thank you.